Good morning.
Are you considering at all closing our borders to China?
Oh, we've got the border restrictions obviously in place. We're not considering anything over and above what we already have in place, which is just restrictions on anyone who has travelled or been present within mainland China, up until this point, obviously because of the outbreak that we have that's affected all of mainland China.
Russia's closed its final border today. Britain, they say, will close borders by the end of the week. If they did, would that change your mind?
A number of countries have travel restrictions, so that's already in play. So when you say close the borders, we are not considering ending travel, as it were, in and out of New Zealand. No, we have based our decision on the opinion of our public health officials, basically, who have said, given the outbreak, substantively, obviously, is within mainland China. That's where we've seen, obviously, as well, very sadly, the vast majority of those who have sadly died as a result of the virus that is still coming out of predominantly mainland China.
See, they're touting this health line that you've set up this morning being as running hot, and yet there are only 365 people registered as self-isolating, and yet there are 1,000 people a day coming into the country.
Yes, those are the ones that are being identified as having who are basically Kiwis coming home. And so the reason that the restrictions aren't in place for them is basically your ability to self-isolate. If you're a tourist, your whole purpose of being in New Zealand is not to stay in one place. And so the likelihood of A, that being possible, and B, that being upheld, obviously low. So that's why that travel restriction exists for them.
But you're not worried about any of that. At 1,000 a day, since this has been going, there's at least 14,000 people coming to the country from mainland China.
We have to allow New Zealanders to be able to return home. They are then self-isolating. We still do not have any confirmed cases within New Zealand. Those who are self-isolating, of course, are being given very clear guidelines around what's expected of them, and we're performing checks. We've got our telehealth services.
Yeah, but there's only 365 on the public health line. There's thousands coming to the country. There's only 365 on the. You can only check people who have registered. There's only 365 who have registered.
What we're doing, Mike, is not out of step with any other country at the moment on this. In fact, we are at the upper end in terms of our travel restrictions.
It's just I remember having a similar conversation with you about measles, and you defended your measles stance, and yet there's a report out over the weekend that said it was a disgrace. You exported it to the Pacific Islands, and it all could have been avoided.
And in fact, on the measles. The work that we need to do, we're very clear on. There is a need for a catch-up campaign, and we'll be rolling one out. We did follow and have followed the WHO advice around measles. Obviously, though, in order for us to get ahead of it, you need to have the resource in place. So we need nurses to go out and perform the vaccinations. We need to make sure that we're in those communities that are being hard to reach.
No, you don't. You need to make a rule that says you've got to get your kid vaccinated, full stop.
If your view is that compulsion would have changed what we experienced with the measles,
no question it would have changed it. It changed it in Australia. It was compulsory in Australia. It changed it. The vaccination rate went up. I told you all this at the time. The government, the report says, and this is your Ministry of Health, the government in action left the door open to last year's outbreak of a preventable disease.
I'm going to agree. Actually, the Ministry of Health were asking for additional measles vaccinations going back a number of years. And yes, we absolutely need to lift those vaccinations, but you have to have the people to be able to deploy in order to make sure you're vaccinating. When we came into government, we had a huge deficit in healthcare. We've now employed over 1,700 nurses. We now have the ability to start rolling out these kinds of campaigns. But what I will say also, Mike, when it comes to measles, you and I completely agree when it comes to our stricter feeling about those who stand against vaccinations. I'm 100% with you.
Yeah, but the difference is that feeling something doesn't solve your problem. And Patasis Harris said exporting a disease to a country with fragmented healthcare is something to be ashamed of. Are you ashamed?
And Tongan's returning home, for instance, Mike, or would you have liked a travel restriction on individuals being able to return home? That's how it travelled into the Pacific. Measles is one of the most infectious diseases. Someone can walk into a room and be infected, leave the room, and someone else entering into it can be infected.
And by having everybody inoculated, you prevent that happening.
You're 100% right, but that includes in the recipient country as well. So that's why we have supported vaccination campaigns in other countries in the Pacific. And so the number of vaccinations that we've either funded or sent into Tonga has been in the thousands for that very reason, because of how infectious it is. But the question of a compulsion, I think you and I would agree, we just want to do what works.
Well, compulsion does work. It's irrefutably true.
No,
once you're jabbed, you're jabbed. It's a statement of fact.
Will always, again, yes, that's true, but making it compulsory does not mean that everyone then accesses a vaccination.
More people do.
Unfortunately, it wouldn't have stopped, for instance, the fact that Australia still had an outbreak as well, and they have compulsory vaccination. So, look, we both agree we've got to lift the vaccination rates. It's all a matter of how. But you'll be hearing more on that about it from us today.
Quick question on public broadcasting. Are these a bunch of pointy heads getting angsty about classical music, or have they got a point?
They've got a point, actually. And to say I've been a little bit missed by the situation would be an understatement.
So what are you going to do about it?
I'll be saying a bit more on it today. Cabinet's going to have a discussion today. I do take seriously the fact that we need to allow Radio New Zealand to undertake their own programming. It wouldn't be appropriate for us to jump in there. But I see this as beyond programming. The movement of it off the FM frequency, when the minister was briefed on that recently, he expressed serious concerns about that, asked for a bit of time to see if we could find an alternate, so that wasn't the case. RNZ went ahead anyway. So we're pretty frustrated by the situation.